For those of you in the market for a wallet-friendly build, Corsair just might have something spectacular for you. Corsair sent their Carbide SPEC-04 mid-tower case over to me to get my perspective. And with this aggressive, angular front panel similar to what you see on their Spec Alpha case, it's hard not to look at. The case's MSRP is $49 and generally speaking, the lower your budget, the lower your in-game polygon count. But this may be the only case where it actually works out in your favor. The chassis is made of plastic and steel with a tinted acrylic window, stands 433mm tall, 201mm wide, and 492mm deep, and accommodates power supplies up to 225mm long with a removable dust filter for said power supply. A kind of front dust filter with this overlaid grate type of design, and 4 feet featured on the foundation for fair airflow. The I/O can be found on the right side of the case, featuring a reset button, hard disk activity indicator, headphone and microphone jacks, a USB 2.0 port, a USB 3.0 port, and the power button. Going for a ride inside the Carbide, it supports mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards, with pre-installed standoffs and a middle peg for smooth sailing during installation. I love that little peg leg. We also find 7 expansion slots, support for CPU coolers up to 170mm tall, GPUs up to 370mm long, an area up front for 3 hard drives, toolless with a little flex, or SSDs, screwdriver required, an OK cutout behind the motherboard tray for partially easy cooler installation, as well as 2 spots for SSDs, not toolless, and support for up to 5 fans, 2 120s or 2 140s in the front, with one 120mm LED fan pre-installed in the center by default, 2 120s up top, and one 120 in the back. You have 3 color options, black with a gray accent and black with a yellow accent, both of which come with a white LED fan, or black with a red accent with the fan sporting red LEDs. Corsair boasts good airflow with this fan, and we'll fill our sails with that in a minute. But how does it sound? In terms of water cooling support, you can fit a 120mm radiator up top and a 120mm rad in front. If you drop your drive bay like it's hot, you can cool down with a 140mm radiator instead. And while there is no official support for a 280mm rad, no one tells me what to do. For thermal testing, I'll be running several configurations. The first is the case's default config, with the single 120mm fan intake, no exhaust, and the Darkrock Pro 3 CPU cooler, firmly mounted on the i7-5820K with a fairly aggressive overclock of 4.2 GHz at 1.3 volts, and the Zotac GTX 980 Ti amp Extreme graphics card at stock settings. This test will serve as an out-of-the-box experience to challenge Corsair's airflow claim. The 5820K doesn't come with a stock cooler, and I didn't have anything on hand that was more budget-friendly, but this should be fine for observing deltas between test instances. At an ambient temperature of 23 degrees Celsius, after an hour of stress testing in Furmark and Intel burn test using the default fan curves in the BIOS of the MSI X99A SLI Plus motherboard, we see the GPU and CPU sit at 69 and 89.67 degrees Celsius respectively. For our no restrictions test, we'll move the 120mm fan from front intake to rear exhaust, and add 2 140mm fans in front with the panel off. Running the same test at an ambient temperature of 23.2 degrees Celsius, we see the GPU and CPU sit at 64 and 78.5. With the front panel back on, we see temperatures rise to 68 and 87.33 degrees Celsius for the GPU and CPU. And if you decide to upgrade to a 280mm radiator later, again not officially supported, using Corsair's H110i all-in-one cooler with the performance mode profile enabled, under an ambient temperature of 24.7 degrees Celsius, we see our GPU and CPU hover at around 70 and 78.33 degrees Celsius respectively. I found these thermals to be less than cool. I removed the front dust filter by undoing these metal fingers, removing the grate, and yanking the filter out, and I saw temperatures stay pretty much the same for the default configuration, but our airflow config witnessed a drop of about 2 degrees Celsius on the CPU. So to recap, the case's airflow won't blow you away, but I ought to remind you that the target audience for this case is not the guy who's doing any sort of aggressive overclocking with the high-end chips. It offers support for entry-level all-in-one water cooling, decent drive options, and better than your average budget cable management, but we'll get back to that in a minute. The case aesthetic, while subjective, is pretty awesome in my opinion. The bold front panel screams gamer without being too obnoxious, as contradictory as that statement sounds, and the case as a whole feels pretty solid. The front panel, removed by yanking the bottom out, potentially with some difficulty, I found to be surprisingly robust. I almost mistook it for a riot shield. Mad respect, yo. The tinted window is a great idea, especially for budget builds where you may be a victim of ketchup and mustard cables. This way, you can still see your components, but anything not lit up in one way or another is significantly subdued. But no product is without flaws, and are the issues here enough to sink this little battle boat? The little issues first, there are no rubber grommets, though I can really hardly fault it for that since I couldn't find any cases at this price point featuring that convenience. But there's also no cable pass-through at the top of the chassis for things like your fan cables or your CPU power cable. There's a kind of bottom pass-through, but you'll want to route those cables before installing your power supply. Next problem, there's no top dust filter, though again, a rarity for cases at this price point. Behind the motherboard tray, the side panel does leave enough space for cable management, and there are enough tie-down points to use, but I did have difficulties making it work, since the bottom can be a bit restricting. I do want to point out that I used a modular power supply, and some people on a tight budget may not have that luxury, though I also kept as little cable length as possible in the main chamber of the case, making my life all the more difficult. Leaving excess cable in the main compartment yielded no issue in putting the panel back on. This brings me to my next point. If they had a power supply shroud or a basement cover, that would help to alleviate a lot of the cable bulge. Most of those issues to me are fairly minor though. Some of them are things where you deal with it once and then you're all set for a while. Others were decisions made to target that budget point. For example, on a smaller budget, there's a good chance you won't be doing any water cooling or even overclocking. So radiator support may not even be a factor for you. My biggest criticism for this case is the I/O location. The window implies you'd want to place it on your right. The I/O being on the right side implies it'd be easier to reach on your left. With the case on your right, you won't see your hard drive indicator light, though I don't imagine anyone actually looks at that anyway. But if you use your front connections for headsets or microphones, you'll have cables cutting across the front, and that may be an issue for cable length. There's also a good chance you won't want this up against a wall. While you'll still be able to access the buttons, assuming you don't have thick sausage fingers like I do, higher profile USB devices most likely won't fit. I'm glad that they didn't put it on the front or the top of the case, but I feel like it would have made more sense to go on the side with the window. And my largest concern with this case is airflow out of the box. This was slightly remedied by removing the front dust filter in a mildly barbaric way, but I feel like this would have been less of a problem with a different implementation for the dust filter and a cutout at the bottom of the panel, which would have also made removing said panel a little bit easier. If you can get over those issues, you have a really attractive case. The tinted acrylic window I find to be perfectly appropriate and simultaneously classy, and while the I/O location makes me scratch my head a bit, the case has a fairly modest footprint, making it great for smaller desks. And then you've got that front panel aesthetic, a real spectacle to behold. The case is available today on Corsair's site, and if I see Amazon or Newegg links for it, I'll have those in the description as well. As usual, the first one will be my Amazon affiliate link, where I get a small kickback if you buy stuff at no additional cost to you. But if you think I suck, there's a regular link a little bit further down. What's your angle on this case? Let me know in the comments below. And so, that's all I have to say about that. Like, dislike, subscribe, share, leave me questions if you've got them. Thanks for watching. My name is Steven, and I am ALittleDIMM. Bye-bye. To lower your in-game polygon count. But this main, I got distracted by my mouth and I don't know why. And 4 feet features on the front. Oh, hard disk activity. I'll show you a hard disk. Whatever that means. GPU is up to 370 Whoa. GPU is up to 370 black with a gray accent and black with a yellow accent. I just spit. With the fan sporting red LEDs. LEDs like LEDs, LEDs. I don't know why I said it that way. Red and LED rhymed, so I thought it was cute. Or something, I don't know. And I didn't have anything 68 and 87.33 degrees Celsius for the CPU. No, other way around. Temperatures rise to 68 and 87.3. Any sort of aggressive overclocking with high. Aw, rats. I put in, like, punctuation. You figured I'd follow it every once in a while. Mad respect, yo. Is this a gang sign? I'm not even sure. No issue in putting the back panel back on. Oh, hold on. You know what? I'll just leave. You'll have cables crudding. But I feel like it would have made more